Our next presenter is Mr. Emmanuel Dana. Dana will be speaking on the creation of a datasets to advance cybersecurity research in electric vehicle charging stations. Dana holds a master's degree in computer science from the University of New Brunswick, specializing in the cybersecurity of electric vehicles charging stations. He has served as an assistant researcher at the Canadian Institute of Cybersecurity, collaborating with industry partners to enhance the security of operational technology. With over 10 years of experience, Emmanuel Dana brings a wealth of expertise in power utility substation automation and SCADA communication systems. His dedications to advancing research in critical infrastructure cybersecurity is evident in his contribution to the field. Welcome, Mr. Dana. At this point, I will hand it over to you, and I look forward to listening to your presentation.
Well, thank you, Sumit, for the introduction. Welcome, everyone. So today I will be talking about the creation of the CIC EVSE 2024 dataset, which is one of our latest datasets at CIC. So I'll walk you through the creation and how we went about the experiment and all the attacks that were carried out in the dataset. So for the outline, I'll go through over the background of exactly the various components of the EV charging station infrastructure, then around through some attacks on the EV charging station, then go through the step-by-step process we took for the creation, and then some experiments that were carried out on the data sets just to check its statistical and machine learning capabilities. Then I'll highlight some future research directions also. So as we know, currently EV charging stations and EV in general are a hot topic. There is increased adoption of electric vehicles currently, and which has led to increased deployment of electric vehicle chargers around us. I'm sure wherever city you find yourself, you see EV chargers springing up around. And as we can see, projections are that in about 6 years' time, over 50% of all EV electric vehicles sold are going to be electric vehicles, which is kind of an interesting projection. Now, this adoption has been due to an increased environmental consciousness by all of us, and also favorable government policies to sort of help users to adopt the electric vehicles. Also, there's been increase in battery technologies, which has increased the energy charging density and the charging speed also. So basically, when it comes to the EV charging stations, there are a number of types. We can talk about the level 1, level 2, and level 3 chargers. Level 1 and 2 basically involve the use of AC, and the level 2 are fast chargers, which are direct current. There are a number of features or capabilities of all these kind of charging stations, and I've listed a number of them, stemming from the charging capacity, the interface types, the accessibility, the communication capabilities, the identification authentication means, and also the operational features. Now, for in terms of the hardware features, we can see that the main components of the EV charging station is the power electronic component, which is sort of the actual component for conditioning the power and then converting the energy, in the case of AC chargers, DC chargers, converting from maybe AC to DC and all those kind of stuff. Then for the other components we can mention is the main board, or the SEC, which is the second equipment communication controller, which focuses on, which is like the main agent and provides the intelligence and hosts the software that I'll talk about later. Then the charging station interfaces also, which interfaces the vehicle and the charging station. Then there are remote communication interfaces like Wi-Fi and the cellular interfaces also. For software, we can talk about the firmware, the client applications, and also the server applications, which is very key in helping to achieve the various features of the electric vehicle. There are a number of security concerns, actually. I'll start with the physical. Actually, this is a very big problem now. We can see some of the chargers are being vandalized in a number of ways, that some cables could be cut, or for any kind of malicious purposes, which disrupts services, actually. Then there's also tampering of the J1772 interface, which is sort of a common interface used in North America area, which can deceive the electric vehicle to the charger to think it is probably connected to an actual vehicle, for instance. Just by using a resistor and some diodes, you are able to deceive the charger into thinking that. And for the cybersecurity, we have seen a number of hardware related issues, such as the lack of standardization, the potential for supply chain attacks, for instance. The EVSE also has suffered from a number of malware attacks stemming from malicious devices that can be connected to it, and also malicious firmware updates. The communication interfaces could also be exploited, in the sense that you can have the case where the power line communication technology can be actually exploited. These are some available charging stations on the market, level 2 chargers, and you can see they used some hardware platforms such as the STM32 controller and Raspberry Pis for implementation. In terms of a typical attack campaign, this diagram depicts what can happen, what could possibly go wrong. And as you can see down there, there are a number of attacks that have already been reported, and the numbers continue to increase. Typical of which, one of the most worrying attack is the broken wire attack, which the attacker can remotely control and interface the electric vehicle charging station, and is able to disrupt the charging process. And this can be done probably about 50 meters away from the charging station, which is quite a worrying trend. We also saw some attacks on the Russian electric vehicle charging stations, where the chargers were made to display some messages from the attackers. Now, why the data set? Actually, for cybersecurity research and coming up with a way to understand how the charging stations behave and to propose a good solution in terms of security, we need to sort of, as Dr. Sajjad mentioned, profile the behavioral patterns of the charging station, for instance. And to do this, we need some historical data, which contains the operational features and also the conditions of the charging stations, and are both benign attack scenarios. So actually, before this research, we didn't really have any such data set out there, which was very worrying when it comes to investigating security solutions. I will just walk us through some the steps we went through to create this data set. So basically, the initial stages to set up the data set testbed, then generate the data sets itself, then do some evaluation and benchmarking, and publishing the data set for researchers to have access to the data. So this is an overview of the testbed. As you can see, we have an actual level 2 EV charging station in there, and this idea is to make it as realistic as possible. As you can also see, we have actual hardwares. We use Raspberry Pis for the charging station, a scenario which involves host and network-based attacks, for instance, just to see the actual hardware behavior under all these kind of conditions. Whilst all these attacks were happening, we also tried to log a number of data. One of the data was from the power consumption pattern, for instance. The question is, are we able to distinguish the behavior of the charging station, the main controller itself? Can we detect, for instance, if we can see any signs of maybe a network-based attack, for instance, when it, just by analyzing the power of consumption. Okay, so we took network-based data, host-based data, and also power consumption data, just to be able to understand how the device was behaving. So basically, this was the setup we had, and it was as realistic as possible. For the network, you can see the setup. We have the main switch, which was sort of sitting in between the OCPP remote client, which came with the actual EV level 2 charging station that we had, and the actual level 2 charger at the lab. Then we have the attacker sitting somewhere in between, launching various network-based attacks. We also had another scenario where we have the EVSE, which is the Raspberry Pi that we used to represent that. Then also launching various network-based and host-based attacks on the EVSE, just to see its behavior and also collect the data that we needed to collect. The diagram below shows the power consumption pattern, how we were able to capture the power consumption pattern from the host using the I2C bus setup. So these were the various attacks that were carried out. We had various forms of reconnaissance attacks, various forms of denial of service attacks, and various forms of host-based attacks stemming from cryptojacking, where we ran actual crypto malware on the EVSE, and also backdoor attacks, where we carried out a number of malicious activities, all trying to map the attacks to the meta-attack framework to keep it as realistic as possible. The various features of the charging stations data set that we collected have been shown in the table here. As you can see, we have three main data sources, two of which are host-based data sources. The first one is the network-based, which the main feature here is the current consumption pattern of the EVSE. So the general observation is that in the normal charging stations that we have deployed, when you check the reading, you're able to monitor the current consumed or the energy consumed by your vehicle as it's charging. But then at the back end, from the charging station device point of view, the main board's power consumption is not monitored in any way. So the idea is to see if we monitor this consumption, if it's going to have any impact on the charging station. So that's what we did. And this is how our data set compares to all the existing data sets that were there before, which were more focused on electrical engineering and power analysis, not so much focused on data, not so much focused on cybersecurity research. So basically, we carried out a number of experiments just to see how good or otherwise this data set performs in terms of detecting or helping the research community to study the behavior of the charging station. And as you can see on the screen, this is just data from the power consumption patterns. And it's interesting to see that there is actually difference in power consumption patterns whilst the various attacks were happening. So reconnaissance, for instance, is the least to be detected. These are percentage changes. So you have how different the baseline power consumption when the charging station is operating in normal conditions, and you have the various other attacks having some kind of deviations from the baseline. And you can see cryptojacking and denial of service attacks are actually high up there in terms of deviations from the power consumption. There is also the analysis of the HPC and kernel events, which is the host-based data that was generated from the sources, the main board. You can see the various event count and the various attack conditions or scenarios and the various deviations from all these events. And you can, as you can see, it's quite obvious that there is changes in the baseline behavior of the board or of the EV charging station when they are under all these kind of attacks. And this is an unsupervised way of using TSNE to visualize the various scenarios in the dataset. So we just push the dataset into TSNE for it to, without any labels, for it to try and distinguish and cluster them. And as you can see, it's able to sort of put them into clusters and distinguish to some extent the various scenarios, which is very good when it comes to machine learning experiment. Also, we perform some form of machine learning experiment on a number of the, we use a number of the classical machine learning models just to see how the data set performs when it comes to experimenting with or detecting attacks using the models. And we try to pitch HPC events against kernel events, for instance, and for the various attack scenarios. And we'll also try to pitch the binary classification approach and multi-class classification approach for the network scenarios also. And these are the performances. As you can see, the performances are quite good, and which sorts of justify the viability or the potency of this data sets to help the community when it comes to researching topics like anomaly detection, for instance, just to see how we are able to detect if there are any anomalies in the data sets, for instance. Yeah. So for future research directions, there are a number of directions that this can go. This is actually, I would say, the beginning of greater things to come, because EV charging stations are currently being adopted, and the industry side and the academic side are all focusing on how best to come up with solutions to secure them as much as possible. So one future direction we can look at is how we can expand or extend the data set, for instance, to include much more scenarios. The two main protocols used for charging station is the OCPP and the ISO 15118 for V2G communication, for instance. So the question is, are we able to launch specific attacks on these protocols, and are we able to see how these protocols perform in terms of their strength and weaknesses and all that? So these are some investigations that can be carried out. And also we can look at increasing the number of charging stations involved in the test or experiments, for instance, so that we can see how the various vendors, charging stations from the various vendors behave under attacks. These are some ideas that we can also experiment in. Also, one major security solution that has to be adopted or investigated for charging station is the topic of anomaly detection. So we should be able to investigate or come up with models that would use this data set for the purpose of detection when it comes to the various kind of anomalies that can occur in the charging station infrastructure. And the thing is, depending on the viability or the extent to which we grow the data sets, we expose more scenarios in data set, and we are able to train a model that can generalize and be robust enough to be able to detect various kinds of attacks when it comes to anomaly detection. Then finally, we can look at the introduction of security information and event monitoring system, which is like a higher level umbrella solution to monitor the various charging stations. For instance, we can push all the data generated from all the charging stations, the security event, the logs, even if we have local anomaly detections modules deployed within the charging stations itself, we can push all these logs to somewhere, maybe push the logs to the same tool for the purpose of detecting and oversight, trying to identify in real time if there are any anomalies coming up in the data sets, in the charging station, for instance. That's it for today. Thank you for joining, and I would leave for the next presenter. Thank you.
Thank you, Dana. That was again really insightful and really interesting to listen to as well. We are certainly moving from times where automobiles had little to no technology to times where electric vehicles are built entirely around technologies. So I'm sure your data set and your research around electric vehicles would be very imperative and integral for researchers around the world to use, and it will help shape the technology as we know in the future. So at this point, let's see if we have a question from one of our viewers. So the question is, how critical are such breaches, and how can the data sets that you mentioned can help?
So the question is, how critical are what?
How critical are such breaches now that we are moving to times that your vehicles are entirely based around technology, and the charging substations are also based around technology, so there is always a threat of such breaches. So how critical are such breaches, and how your data sets and your research that you mentioned can help?
Yeah, so as you can see now, as humans, we are modeling our mobility around the availability of electric vehicles and hence electric vehicle charging stations. So for you to move from one place to the other, for instance, across cities, you need a network of vehicle charging stations along the way, along the highways, for instance. And imagine you driving your Tesla, for instance, and you get to a point where you see the vehicle needs to be charged, and the very charging station that you arrive at is under an attack, for instance. It's not available for the service. So availability is very critical when it comes to charging stations, okay, and how dependable they are. And these attacks tend to threaten some of these features and functionalities of the charging station. So it's very critical for us to look at it. And as I mentioned, the data set has been, we try to make it as comprehensive enough to feature some of these scenarios, but then, of course, we have some room to improve upon the scenarios and add more scenarios to make it rich enough for future research here.
Thank you, Dana. Again, thank you for sharing your experience, your research, and your data sets with us. And I'm certainly very interested in the field of EVs and substations. I had good time listening to your presentation. It was very insightful and enjoyable.